In this video, we're going to look at the WebGL Kinetic Typography background extension. It's an extension that allows you to create your own 3D backgrounds. Unlike other extensions that we have, it does not come with any presets in terms of visuals, but rather it gives you a number of settings that when mixed together can create all kind of 3D shapes, as we can see here. So you can think of it as a sort of a do-it-yourself toolbox so that you can create your own unique 3D backgrounds. So things may look complicated at first because we don't have any presets and there are a lot of settings. But conceptually, the extension is made up of three parts. The first part is the 3D shape. And this is essentially the initial 3D geometry that we would be working with. The next part is an image, and this is simply an image of our choosing that we apply on top of the geometry, and we can also repeat it a number of times both horizontally and vertically. The third and last parts are the different effects that we have and that we can combine in different ways in order to create all kind of visual effects. Alright, so let's look at the different type of settings that we have. There is a documentation on the Elements Hive websites with a small description of each setting, and you can also join our Facebook group and ask any questions that you may have there if you encounter any problems or you're not sure about something when using the extension. So it's an extension to the section element, so we access it from the design tab as usual. The element under the Elements Hive category, we have the background type WebGL Kinetic Typography. So the first part that we have is the shape category, gonna say. And this groups the first two parts that we discussed, that is the 3D shape and the image. So in terms of shapes, we have a number of shapes that we can choose, and they all look different, obviously, by default. So in this case, let's keep a box. The second part is the image, and in here we can use any kind of image that we want. We're going to be using this one here, but any image depending on what you're trying to create, you can of course use whatever image you want. The settings that we have in the image is the repeats horizontal and vertical, and this is simply the number of times that we can repeat the image both horizontally and vertically. And of course, depending on the shape and what you're trying to achieve and your zoom level, etc., you can repeat it as many times as you need to. So put it back in the box and look at the next one. The next one is the next setting we have is the animates or image animations, and this will apply a marquee effect on the image itself. So we can change the axis, whether it goes horizontally or vertically, and the direction, whether it goes forward or backwards. Last thing we can change is the speed of the animation itself. So one thing you will notice is if, for example, we have a torus shape in this case, and we do the animation horizontally, it will look as if the shape itself is rotating. Instead of just the marquee effects, it gives the illusion that the shape is rotating itself. So depending, just like everything else, the effects do depend on the type of shape that you're using and what type of orientation you give it. Speaking of orientation, that is the last settings that we have in the shape category, where we have our transforms. So the transforms are basically your positioning. So you can position your shape however you want them to be. And you can also change the rotation of the shape on all three axes, since all of these are 3D shapes. Now, one thing I should note regarding the shapes is that we have two types of shapes, the plane square and plane rectangle. These are also, of course, 3D shapes, since we are creating a 3D scene. However, these type of shapes are like a sheet of paper where they don't have any depth to them. So as you can see, there is no depth on the z-axis. So they just have the front and the back side. We will look later at the implications of this in terms of some of the effects that we have. For now, the other thing I should mention is we have a zoom effect for the camera, which is responsive, so you can have different zoom effects for different breakpoints. And what this means is that we can make the shape as if it is smaller by changing the camera zoom, or in the case we have some depth inside the shape, we can even look at the inside of the shape. In this case, the image that we are applying will look reversed on the inside, and what we can do is just, in this case it's horizontally flipped, so we can flip the coordinates by giving a negative value. And in this case, of course, if we look at from the outside, then it will look like if the image was flipped, which is exactly the case here. So if you're trying to look on the inside of a shape, you may choose to either, depending on the shape, flip horizontally or vertically, or you can just download or upload an image that is already flipped in the given axis. So this basically covers the first two parts that we have, the image and the shape. The next section that we have is the effects, and these are all the type of effects that we can apply to the shape or the image. So the first one that we have is displacements. And the displacements, let's try to make it easier to see if we choose a plane. So the displacement effect, what it does is, as the name suggests, it displaces the vertices, the different parts that make up a shape, on the z-axis. So if we increase the strength factor, you can see that it twists it, and it doesn't twist it, but it brings forward towards the camera, because now we're not applying any transform, so the z-axis is towards the camera. It displaces the different parts of the image towards on the z-axis, and so we can apply different strength to it, which may or may not be a good idea depending on what we're trying to do. And we can change the speed of the displacements as well. And of course, just like every effect, I would not be doing this every time, but every effect will be visually different depending on the type of shape that you have. So what looks good on one shape may not necessarily good on another shape, given the same image, the same repetition level, the same transformations, etc. So you need to adjust the settings. You will be able to adjust, of course, every setting that you have based on what you're trying to do and what you're working with. So in this case, the displacements, we can use the displacement to create a sort of a pulsating in different sides sphere. Looks like a blob, and as we will see later, and as you can see here, we're mixing the displacements with some other effects in order to create this animated blob here. So that's for the displacements effects. And the next effect that we have is the swirl effect. And the swirl effect, it basically skews the image in a wave pattern. And so if we increase the factor here, you can see that the image itself gets skewed in a wavy pattern. And we can choose to go the direction, whether it is forward or backwards. And of course, like all of the settings, there is a maximum, just because we don't want the sensitivity of the slider to be too sensitive, but it doesn't mean anything. You can give it whatever value you want. There may be some higher values that make more sense depending on what you're trying to create, the image that you have, the shape you have, etc. The next setting that we have is twists, and in order to make it easier to visually see what the twist effect does, let's change the shape to plain rectangle. From the name, it should be pretty clear, but it basically twists it. It twists the shape based on the setting that you apply. So in this case, if we enable the twist effect and increase the twist factor, you can tell that it's twisting the shape on the x-axis, and it's basically, in this case, it's like a towel being squeezed. And of course, you can give whatever value that you want. And just for completeness sake, change the orientation. And I don't know, maybe decrease the zoom, increase the repetition of the image. I'm just doing whatever here. See what it looks like. I have no idea what it's gonna end up looking like, really, but that's basically what you will be doing with this extension, is trying different things until you find whatever it is you want to do, or something that looks good enough for you. So I guess it would be, if I was doing this, I would do it this way, and that would change the background, I guess, to this color. May look good. I don't want to get distracted here. Yeah, it looks pretty nice. I would probably add some more effect to it and make it even nicer, but anyway, getting distracted. So let's go back. That's basically what the twist effect does, and again, it will look different depending on the shape that you have. So in some shapes it may not look good, in others it would look nice, but then you would wanna Like in this case, you would probably want to have something like 3 or 2 to change the original donuts to something else. Alright, enough for the twists. I think it's pretty easy to understand. The next one is the wave effects, and just as the name suggests, this applies a wave effect or wave pattern to the shape. So again, this will look different depending on the shape that you have. So one thing we can do with this is if we use, let's say, a plain rectangle, for example, this would be like the most basic usage probably you can make of this. You can do a sort of a waving flag. So if we put a repetition of 1 and we get rid of the animation, here we have the American flag waving. So one thing that we can do is we can increase the frequency of the waves, and this is basically the number of waves that gets created, and we can increase or decrease the amplitude. So in this case, probably I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more to be more visible, and let's see, I would probably want to decrease this. Looks okay. The other thing we can do is increase the speed. By default it's at the maximum of 1, but you can go above that if that's what you want to do. Maybe 2 is okay. The other thing that we can do is we can apply a shadow to the waves. So it's called enable ripple shadow, and this makes the wave part a bit darker than the rest. So it basically gives a sort of a fake shading to the texture that we have. And if we had some lighter image, let's see. Let's try this one, and probably want to repeat it a number of times. As you can see, there is a light and dark version based on where the wave is. So if you increase the frequency of the wave, maybe it would be even more visible in the video, but I can clearly see it here, but here. So this is light, this is dark. Okay, so let's see, I should disable the wave shadow directly because it will always be enabled. That's just how settings work here with Breakdance. And for the next one, we have the fog effects, and in order to explain this, I will use a rectangle or just a box. That's fine too, and I will zoom in a little bit. That's too much, so let's go here, and why not, let's change the image. We already saw we can use any type of image, and because there's no limitations to type of images that you can use. There is one instance where you would want to use a specific type of image, and we will talk about that later. But let's see, what I wanted to do is talk about the wave, and in order to explain the wave a bit better, I will just change the transformation a little bit here. And so what the not the wave, I'm sorry, it was the fog effects. So the fog effects, what it does is it applies a sort of it mixes in another color with the original texture, and the color mixing is applied on the z-axis. In this case, with the transform that we did, the z-axis is going from the back here to the front here. And so what this can be used for is applying a color on top that you want to mix in with the original texture. You can, for example, you can change the color to whatever color that you want. And one usage that you can do, and which is the most useful, is using the same color as whatever background color you have in order to blend the shape with the background, so it looks like it's parts of the background. Like when I say the background, in this case I'm talking about the color, but it will look like it is coming out of the background. And when you animate this with different effects, you can create some pretty cool stuff. So if we had another different type of zoom level and with a different factor, stronger factor, it would essentially look like it disappears and it comes back again. Where was I? In the effects, if I do a displacement something higher, in this case it is too much. No, just do maybe 1.5. Right. So you get the idea. When you mix in different effects together, you will be able to create different type of look and feel. Right. So going back to the fog. As we saw, we can blend in the shapes with the background color. Another thing to note regarding the fog, if we look at, let's say, change the image back to this text here, and maybe have this kind of repetition. And for now, let's get rid of all these transforms. So now we have the fog applied, and let's do something relatively low, and let's zoom in inside the shape so that we can look at the inside of the shape. You see, right now we are on the inside of the shape, and because we have the fog applied, everything is covered on the inside, since the fog is applied, like we said, on the z-axis. But if we give it a negative value, instead of being applied from the inside or the extremity inside the shape to the outside of the shape, we flip the coordinates again. And so instead here now we have the fog being applied from the outside inside, and in this case it looks like a vignette type of effect. And I think that covers everything for the fog. While we have the sphere and we are on the fog section, let me just prep this here. Let's see, what did I want to show. Right, so I will disable the fog for a second. With the sphere object, with the sphere shape, the images that you have, let's see, if we take, for example, let's take this one. Well, no, this is a better example because it is repeatable. It is seamless. I'm gonna take just some whatever image. Yeah, let's take which one would work to showcase what I'm trying to say here. Right, this one for example. As you can see, with this type of image, the repetition is, the image itself is not seamless, it's not tileable. So this is the same thing that you would have, the problem you would have if you're doing it as a background image and you repeat the image a number of times. There would be a clear separation of that image when you repeat it. So you can see here it's being repeated here. There is a line that clearly separates the two because the image doesn't connect at the extremities. This is not a problem when using this type of image, for example, because the text is in the middle and it's the same color and we have the same spacing on the extremities of the different shape. And it would not be a problem in something like this because it can be repeated relatively smoothly. And this is what you call tileable or seamless type of images. So those are the images that you would want. And it's not just with the sphere. This problem would be visible with pretty much everything. A torus, etc. If you're using some normal images, you want to make sure that it's something that can be repeatable without the seam being visible, or you orient it in a certain direction that would make the seam not so visible, or that you don't worry about it, you don't have to worry about it too much. The other thing worth mentioning is when looking at the sphere, if you're trying to do something like a let's say a globe, for example, you need to use something called equirectangular pictures, and these are pictures made specifically to wrap around a spherical object. So in this case we have here this standard image, I think I got it from Wikipedia, of the Earth. If we use it on a sphere and we do not have any repetition, we put it on one, then we have a perfectly wrapped image around the sphere. If we animate it on the horizontal and going forward and leave the speed as it is and take out the transformation we have, and this is our little Earth planet. And we can eventually use the fog in order to apply some let's see, we should have some positive value there, and maybe apply something very light. Change the strength factor to maybe 2, and up, and maybe 0.6, 1 point, and maybe 1.1. 1 was good, yeah. And see, now the image looks like there's this light highlighting around the globe using that color. Looks like basically the atmosphere if you're looking at the outside, kind of. We're not going for realism here, but you can see all kind of usage that you can do with these settings. Right, I think I got sidetracked a little bit there, but it was important to note for this equirectangular pieces of images that you can use, because this is, I think, one of the usage people might try to do with this. Right, so the fog is disabled, and just make sure we have the shadow, yes, and so let's change the shape to something else, Taurus, why not? And let's change the image back to our faithful Elements Hive image and change it to maybe 3 or maybe 6. Okay. Right, so the next effect that we have, next effect is the Fresnel effect. And what the technical description of it is irrelevant, I think, but for our purpose, let's see, it'll be better or more visible, easier to see if we have let's see here, maybe 9, and I will change the camera zoom a little so that we see better. Right, so the Fresnel effect, what it will do is give you a sort of fake shading in our purpose, in our case. It's not exactly technically what it's doing, but we basically will have darker and lighter in this case because of the color that we use in darker, lighter parts. We can change the color to be to see the effect that it's doing. So it's applying this color to this part, it's blending in with the rest of the texture image, and we end up with this look, which is not very interesting. In here we can make it sort of lighter, it's like a haze. If we take something closer to the original color, I don't even know what that was, then it's like an additional coat being applied to certain parts and it highlights the other parts. And one usage that you can use this for, just like before for the fog, is if you use either the same background or if you use essentially any dark color, really in this case, is you get the effect that we had at in the beginning, where it looks like a sort of lightning is being applied to the 3D scene, when in fact there is no lightning in these scenes. And the other thing we can do is increase the intensity. And of course the look will be different depending on the image that you're using and the initial colors that are within that image, of course. Okay, so that's for the Fresnel effect. The other thing to note is, just like for the fog effects, you can use negative values if you are looking on the inside, and if you use negative values on the outside, it will look something like this. And this will allow you to do a sort of different, depending on the color, of course, but you can change the initial color of your image by mixing in another color. And you can think of it as a sort of a fancy filter effects in this case. I mean, I could spend literally days doing this video if we play around with all this stuff in different ways, but you get the idea of what it does, is that it allows you to give your shapes different type of shading depending on the settings that you use. So the last effect that we have is a mouse follow, and this basically will move the shape. Notice I say move the shape in the direction of the mouse cursor. I make that distinction between, because it does not use the mouse coordinates to replace the coordinates or move it to the exact coordinates, what it does is that it moves that shape based on a distance factor. So this is how far it will travel. That's what it's called, distance factor. So if we have 5, for example, by moving all the way here, we don't even see the shape in some parts at all. And you can make it totally like disappear, which would be like really useless in this case, but this would depend on your camera zoom. So if we had something like 5, the distance that is being traveled will seem smaller because the camera is looking from a closer location. So if we want to increase the camera, now it almost doesn't get out of the scene. And if we had it, say, at 2 on a zoom level, then we can just barely move it. You can even reduce this to maybe say 2, and it's just like a sort of very faint parallax effect. So you can decide what your distance level should be based on your move level. And this will work on touch mobiles or touch devices as well. When you tap the screen, it will move towards the direction where you tapped. So I'm gonna get rid of it here, and let's see, just move back. And the last effect is like for all extensions, you can apply the effect to the whole page if you want. By default, it's only applied to a section, but if you have more sections in your page, the shape will remain there. Or I say shape, but your background will remain and be applied for all your different sections. And of course, you can apply whatever colors you need, the image background, whatever, as usual. Okay, so hopefully now you have a better understanding of the extension and how powerful it can be. If you do have any problems or questions, you can ask them on the Facebook group. And if you do enjoy the content and the Elements Hive plugin, then please give a like to the video and also subscribe to the channel so that you are notified of future videos as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.